celebrating a 90th birthday party. It was actually, your birthday was a month ago. And so you came along, Dad, at the end of 1922. And we're just gonna, obviously that's a long lifespan, and we're just gonna hit a few highlights here. So my first question is, what do you want to share about your growing up experiences?
You're talking about my father and mother, more or less?
You can talk about, yes, we talked about how you, yeah, let's talk about some of that, just their influence on you.
Well, I had a very lucky experience with parents. I always felt both parents affected me equally. I had a shrink one time in connection with a job application, and the fellow insisted that I must have had greater influence from my mother, and I could have bopped him because my father had just as much influence. When I went choring, my dad, it was automatic. We'd have a history lesson. When I worked with Mother, it was organizing canning or helping cull chickens, that sort of thing. So that was, they were both almost equally influential on me.
And that brings up, you had told me a bunch of stories about how you and your mother were the chicken, that was your operation on the farm. You two kind of collaborated on that.
Well, when you're depths of the Depression and you're raising chickens to replace the cattle you lost on a fraud type TB test, Hoover was looking for cheap meat to help the ghettos out. Anyway, we turned to the chickens for salvation, and Mother and I became, if I may say so, quite expert at watching little signs. A healthy chicken that's laying eggs regularly has a pearl-like look to their scales on their legs, and the ring around their eyes will not be bright yellow, it will be pearl-colored. And those are things we'd watch for. The minute we saw that, we'd catch the bird and ship them off to be slaughtered.
You mean when it turned yellow?
And that was kind of an interesting thing. You learn to be kind of sharp at watching for things. Within a decade, I was watching guys with their uniforms and making sure that they were wearing them properly. That was one of your duties in the war as an officer, was to watch the way your men were carrying themselves and how their uniform looked.
Okay. Yeah, I saw a picture one time of the chicken coop, and I always had visions of it just being, you know, a little thing. And this was a big structure. It was like 2 stories high. You had, how many chickens do you suppose you had at any one time?
We put about 430 per fall. They were put away in the fall and never saw grass again. Now that was a large flock for those days. This is the early 30s, and there are far bigger operations today. But people used to drive by and watch this nutty farmer's place where he had lights on all night to help the chickens keep feeding. Not that they ate constantly, but they'd go and pick, and it helped their production.
Okay. Okay, my next question, you kind of touched on it a little bit, but what was the Great Depression like for you?
We detected, if it hadn't been for our parents being the type to keep us informed, we wouldn't have known there was trouble. Small farmers who had a good garden and irrigated their soil could live quite well through that mess. You had a little trouble finding a little money to get new clothes once in a while, but basically we were much better off than the poor people in a city in what I'd call a ghetto situation. That just about sums it up. We didn't really know as children that we were in such trouble as a nation, so on.
So you could pretty much live off the land.
Yeah.
Now, this is a little hard. I know this will be hard for you to narrow this down. What was the most significant thing you learned or saw in World War II?
Oh, as a combat engineer, seeing the rough side of construction, and we weren't in combat as killing other people, really. That wasn't our business. The most important thing that I experienced was the capture of the Remagen Bridge, something we never thought would happen. We were eating a late supper, and I argued with my sergeant that the Germans wouldn't be crazy enough to skip that one bridge. And he said, no, I have a funny feeling we're going to walk over it with dry feet. And sure enough, he won the bet. We learned about 11 o'clock that night that late that afternoon a tank outfit had captured it, and the rest is history. The next day we went over on dry feet, not a shot being fired, not a plane in the sky. It was, well, a minor miracle, and to our unit that was a big point in the war.
Okay, one more question. A lot of people here probably don't know that you also you were involved in the Korean War. You spent time in Japan. I think Mr. Suzuki's already left, but you probably talked to him about that anyway. But you spent time in Japan. So briefly, you want to describe what your job was there and what stood out for you in that experience?
Well, I was in the engineer office in Tokyo. It was close to the Daiichi building, which is where Dugout Doug hung out. That was Douglas MacArthur. And,
did you ever see him?
No, actually, he had been relieved and sent home before I got there, 3-4 months. In any event, I was watching paperwork. This was the Army's early attempt to control uncontrolled paper waste. And it was tough to get a new form printed because you had to prove that it was really necessary. That stuff had grown exponentially after the war, and you were just churning out paper after paper. And that sort of work was just growing crazy, and they passed rules on it, and I was involved in that. And I had a Japanese American as my secretary, sort of, and well, side click, and the lady was a wife of an Air Force man, was the truth secretary, and it was an interesting experience. I wouldn't want to have done it very long. It just wasn't my speed, but it was a job, and that was it.
Okay, well, we're not going to keep these people too much longer, so that was just what we kind of planned on touching on a few of those things, and maybe they'll want to hear some more of your stories later on. But there was something else you wanted to say now here at the end.
Well, I want to thank everyone for coming. There's quite a crowd here right now. I suspect it's kind of our peak attendance at the moment. You hit your timing is perfect to have picked up the two of us chatting here a bit. And I hope you could enjoy yourselves and visit. And I know we have elements of the Michael clan, and we have some Timm members and a few people from the place here. Some of us eat together, so on. So have a good afternoon, and visit and get acquainted with new people, perhaps. Is that all right?
Oh, yes.
I have to be careful. My handlers will get on my back.
Okay. That's it.
Thank you.
Who wants the hot seat now.